Hello, friends. It's me, Nathan Garcia again. Thank you for being with me. I thought I would do this segment after coming across a quote that I read in one of my books that I had to read for school. And this book had this wonderful quote in it. And the quote said, "The most powerful innate ability that any person has is the ability to tell their own story." That's something that is God's gift to us. We have this amazing gift, and we have a lot of amazing gifts. But perhaps the most personal, most meaningful one immediately available for every person is to be able to tell about themselves, to give themselves to others, because that's the only way we can help build friendship, is that we actually find out who the other person is, what they're about. And so in that spirit, I'd like to communicate to you, or share with you rather, my conversion experience. And I wish it was a little bit more glamorous. I wish it was a bit like St. Paul. That would be amazing to see the risen Christ. Unfortunately, it wasn't that glamorous, but it was actually kind of primarily an intellectual thing, an intellectual enterprise, or at least it started out that way. And just to give you some background, I was an atheist for many years. In high school, I was pretty deeply affected by my best friend Michael. My best friend Michael was and still is a wonderful guy. He's a good person, but he grew up in an atheistic household, so that's kind of what he knew. And so he would share with me the usual kind of criticisms, very basic kind of criticisms. Where are the dinosaurs in the Bible, right? Show me proof that God exists and stuff like that. And I didn't have really any catechetical experience growing up, so I was very unprepared to answer those questions. So at the point where I couldn't, it just made sense. All right, well, God, I can't prove God, I can't answer a lot of these other questions, so necessarily God does not exist. So that was my mindset. I wasn't what you would call a militant atheist. I didn't go around saying, Christians and all believers are wrong. And I just thought what a lot of Enlightenment thinkers thought. People who were religious were just kind of ignorant, didn't really know things. They can kind of keep their beliefs. That's fine. I don't see the big harm it's doing me. But then I got to college, and college changes things for sure. And I had the great privilege, looking back on it, of going to a Catholic school. I'd never gone to a Catholic or religious school before. I was public school, born and raised, but I went to St. Mary's College of California. It's a small liberal arts school in the Bay Area, and those pesky Catholic schools, they require you to take a couple religion courses. And so I wasn't looking forward to taking them, but I decided, all right, well, the time's going to come for me to take it, so I'm going to choose the absolute last class in the day so I can sleep in and just hopefully not have to worry too much about this. Looking back, by God's divine providence, I ended up in this professor's class. This professor is actually now a priest. But I ended up in his class, and thank God Almighty that I did, because this man is one of the most kindly, most saintliest, most intelligent people that I ever met. And he's wonderful, wonderfully giving of his time. And I remember after the first few classes, he was beginning to share with us the intellectual tradition of the Catholic Church. And this blew my mind, because I had no idea. I just thought faith was simple. Four simple people. I just thought, okay, I believe in God, that's that. There's nothing else to it. Boy, was my ignorance exposed. Keep that in mind, because that's how I first kind of got introduced to this. But my conversion really began and unfolded in three separate stages. The first stage, I remember specifically where I was in my modern legal philosophy class, and we were reading the book by Yves Simon on the tradition of natural law. And my philosophy professor, was a brilliant man, was basically making the argument from the book that if there is such a thing as natural law, this law of nature, that there's this kind of inherent order, this logic to nature, Where did it come from? Did it magically sprout up? Did it so-called evolve? And with all the things that he imparted to us in that lecture, and I wish for the life of me I could remember more of the details, but he so convincingly proved to me that because there is this coherent order to nature, and the most chaotic parts of on our planet are in the human culture. They're not in nature. Nature has this kind of harmony to it. I'm not saying it's perfect and it's not without its viciousness. It is, and there are some issues with it for sure. But we're the only ones. We're the only creature. We're the only animal that's capable of malice, of just outright murder, for vicious intent. Nature, for all that it is, there is an order to it. There is a rationality to it. And he proved to me, and that book proved to me, that had to come from some being, some higher mind, some higher power, whom we would call God. And I remember leaving that class thinking, oh man, I can't argue with that. That makes too much sense. And I wish I could explain a little bit more eloquently here, but if I'm just relaying to you what impacted me, that was the first thing. That kind of set the ground for the other stages for me. But it was just intellectually to assert and to demonstrate to me that it couldn't have all just come from nothing or by happenstance. That there is something that is related to something beyond us, that we're not just here and abandoned. It's just not chaotic. There is order, there's reason, there's beauty to this. Where did it come from? Who did it come from? So I said, coming out of that class, all right, I believe God exists. Now, did I necessarily believe in the Christian God? Not necessarily. That comes with a whole lot of doctrine and dogma that I wasn't prepared at that point to accept. But I accepted that there was a higher power there. I was prepared to accept that. My next stage, if you will, of conversion was also kind of an intellectual one. I was also kind of a philosophical nature. I was thinking in the courtyard one day, I was reflecting on the 4 cardinal virtues, as students are known to do. The 4 cardinal virtues, according to the ancient Greeks, are prudence, temperance, justice, and courage. They call them cardinal because it comes from the Latin, cardio, which literally means hinge, right? For us, cardio means the heart. Why? Because everything hinges on the heart. If the heart goes, you go. So likewise, the Greeks believed that everything hinged on these 4 virtues. If you didn't have these 4 virtues, and you were, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it so well, but you were. You weren't in a good place, shall we say. And again, they are prudence, temperance, justice, and courage. And I had this epiphany. And it's something that still moves me today because I'm still trying to work through the ramifications and implications of it. And my epiphany was this. There is a reason why we value those 4 virtues. And they're very important virtues. There's a reason why we value prudence. Prudence means being able to make good decisions. It's important to be able to make good decisions to distinguish from bad ones. There's a reason why we value temperance. Temperance just simply means moderation. You don't want to eat too much. You don't want to eat too little. You don't want to do too much of any one thing. It's always good to moderate yourself. It's good to be just. If we don't have a sense of justice, there's no order in society. Everything is just chaotic. But we have a sense of justice, and so there's a reason to value justice. And then finally, courage. And courage, there's a reason to value courage, because what good is knowing all of these virtues if you don't have the courage to enact them? You need that. And there's a reason to value courage. Those are the 4 cardinal virtues, and the church embraces them as they're in the catechism. But then there's 3 other little, maybe pesky virtues, what we would call the 3 theological virtues. And they are famously faith, hope, and love. And my epiphany on the other side of it, the other side of the coin, so to speak, is the irrationality of the three theological virtues. You think about hope. Hope is such a fascinating phenomenon. I could not help but think about a person in Job's situation where everything bad and almost imaginable can happen to that person. That happens. I just think about the people in Puerto Rico right now. Just the whole island without power, people struggling to leave in the airport, and they have to feed their babies, and but without electricity, and I can't imagine the kind of torment and turmoil that they're going through. So many people, I think, have found solidarity and empathy with Job, because it happens to everybody at some point where things just seem to go bad. But you know what's powerful about Job? For as much as he argues with his friends, and ultimately vis-a-vis through God, one, he never loses hope. He never questions the existence of God. He just questions the decisions, and that's an important issue. But it's important to never forget that he never abandons the idea of God. And for him, the hope is always real. The hope is always that he will be vindicated in the end. It's never that he abandons his idea and the existence of God. And what's more, just for hope, you can tell somebody like Job, or anybody who suffered something like that, something extremely detrimental, terrifying, overwhelming, you can tell them there's no reason to expect things to get better tomorrow. But for some godly reason, shall we say, that person can hope that tomorrow will be better. That person can hope, and that virtue, that power, that inherent human virtue can carry you through another day, another year, and for the rest of your life. You can live on hope. And I can't help but think of the movie Star Wars Rogue One, where Jyn Erso, who makes the comment that revolutions were built on hope. You have to think that Christianity, despite all the numerous factors historically, militarily, culturally against it being born in some outpost of the Roman Empire, here we are now. That was born. You'd have to understand. You have to believe on hope. There's no reason to expect why those Christians could have affected the world as much as they did, but they did, and it's not through anything rational. They didn't come up with a plan and say, this is exactly how we're going to do it, and this is how it's going to work out. They did it in the face of extreme, overwhelming odds because they had hope. Hope is an incredibly powerful thing, but it's irrational. A rational person can tell you, this is not going to happen to you, this is not going to happen for you, but the power of hope allows you to continue on. And that's a powerful thing. Faith. Actually, we'll do with love first. Faith is interesting, but love is also fundamentally an irrational thing. And you think about it, and my wife would ask me sometimes, why do you love me? I was like, I can't really answer that. She'd get kind of offended. I guess I can kind of understand why. But for me, I think it would do such a great disservice to my wife to somehow boil down all that I feel for her, all that I'm willing to give to her, and base it down or boil it down to a few reasons. Oh, you're beautiful. Oh, you're kind, and those things are true. But there are some days where maybe my wife isn't as kind, and God knows there are some days where I'm not necessarily kind. And God forbid if my love was and her love was based on that, we'd have some very, very tumultuous days, and we have a very tumultuous marriage. We'd have a very rocky marriage, but thankfully we don't. Love is the all-important reality. The first letter of John 4:8. If you do not have love, you do not know God, for God is love. God created us out of love. God sent his Son because he so loved the world. John 3:16. He is sacramentally present with us out of love. God does not need a reason to love us. He doesn't have a reason saying, okay, well, I'm going to do this. Love it's an irrational thing. You do some crazy, stupid things for love. Some beautiful things for love. You think about all the poetry and all the beautiful deeds that have been done in the name of love. That couldn't have been done so if it was guided by reason. Well, I'm gonna say this word. I'm gonna use this word, and this makes sense. And it speaks from the heart. It speaks from the heart, and that's the beautiful thing about love is that, again, not unlike hope. I mean, you can try to reason with somebody in love, but a person who is possessed by love, who has an immensity of love within them, is capable of great things, is capable of great strength, is capable of doing beautiful works for others, for God. Again, you can't debase it with reason. It exists beyond reason, prior to reason. If God is love, then he exists prior to and beyond and far more deeply than the presence and power of our reason to understand him and to understand his ways. It is irrational, thankfully. And finally, faith. Faith is, yes, it is irrational, and again, thankfully so, because let me just say this, reason is not a bad thing. Reason is a good thing. Reason allows us to very practically deal with the world around us. But, as the Bible says, man does not live on bread alone. You can eat and you can go through the motions of every single day, and that's great, but that's not living. That's basically surviving. And animals can survive, but we're animals, but we're also something more. Us being made in the image of God means that God is operating in us for a much higher purpose, and faith allows us to see that purpose. Faith is the ability to recognize revelation, the validity of revelation, and to be able to incorporate it inside of you. The faith is one of the few things that's actually defined in the Bible. Hebrews 11:1 is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. Evidence is something that's concrete. It's something that's irrefutable. But evidence of things unseen. Your eyes are fallible. They can be deceived. And indeed, many times they are. But your faith, our faith, by virtue of us being created in God's image, has eyes. They have eyes. And they allow us to see very beautiful things, powerful things, things that our physical eyes cannot see. When just a simple thing just comes to mind. But if I see somebody doing something tender, or doing something wonderful, or giving of their shirt or some money to somebody else in need, reason says, okay, well, that's what they did, and there's really no value judgment inherent in reason. It's completely descriptive. But with the eyes of faith, I can see that that's a beautiful thing. That should be a normative thing. That should be something that happens every day. I can see love there. Faith allows us to see the reality of God's love and the power of our hope to expect God to be with us and to save us. All three of them are intertwined, but I guess my point in saying all of this is just simply this. I came to the realization in that epiphany that faith, hope, and love are incredibly paramount. They're real, but they're irrational. And because they're irrational, you cannot subject them to scientific studies. You cannot put love under a microscope. You cannot measure faith. You cannot really examine and break down hope. You can't do that, but they exist. And we all intuitively, implicitly, and yet very consciously know that these exist. And it's at that point that I came to the realization that if I wanted to find out more about the world, the truth of the world, every philosopher wants to seek truth. I realized that in that moment as a philosopher, I would need to study God. I'd have to. If I really wanted to know the truth, I'd have to study God, because being limited by reason, that's a part of it, but that's a small part. That is. And reason and science can't really explain the power and the necessity and the depth of love, faith, or hope. So, with that, I will... Actually, there's one more that finally cemented my my coming to the Catholic faith. I had mentioned my professor in the very beginning. He not only set the groundwork in many ways, but he was very appropriately the final step, if you will, to my conversion. And it was simply this. I wish I could tell you that there was this great argument that he told me. But again, remember, faith is not a rational thing. It's something deeper, it's something more powerful than that. I just remember going to numerous conversations with him. When I approached him after the first few times after class, I said, "Sir, thank you for the lecture, but I still have a lot of questions." And he said, "Nathan, I'm glad. Let's come back to my office. Let's talk about it." And he freely gave of his time. And he would even, we'd even go out to lunch, and we'd have these very spirited debates. And I just remember waking up one day knowing that I believed. And again, it wasn't because of any argument. It was because by virtue of his love and his tenderness and his wanting to get to know me and my issues with all of this, I could recognize God. I could recognize God in his kindness. And I knew what he was talking about now. They're not simply arguments, they're not just individual acts, they're just what lies beneath them. That's where God is. Because God is empowering everything from behind. And if you have the eyes of faith, if you have powerful faith, you can see God clearly everywhere. And I'm still working to get there. And I have a long ways to go. But again, thankfully, I came to the realization there that I think I'd felt God all my life. I didn't know to use the proper words for it. I didn't realize that when I was in the company of friends and when I loved being with friends, I didn't realize that God was present there. But he is. And I realized just even with being with my professor, God was present, and he made himself present. And again, not necessarily by any argument per se, because God makes himself known, in the people who love. If you have love, you know God. That my professor, now father, knew love. And because he did that, I was able to recognize it by the way he lived it out. And I understood that. I understood as best as I could, I think. And I'm still trying to understand more and more every single day. But that's a little bit about my journey, about how I came into the church. And it's been wonderful for me. And those lessons still have new things to teach me. So anyways, hopefully you benefited. Thank you.